So, our speaker today comes to us from San Diego, California. So, it's early out there still. We're grateful to have, as Val said, an amazing speaker today, Jan Phillips. Her talk is titled Stop Learning and Start Knowing. And if you haven't had an opportunity to read her bio, you really should go check it out. There's so much there. It would probably take the entire talk time here for me to go through that. But if you get an opportunity, hey, check out her bio in the newsletter. It is quite impressive and quite extensive. Jan, we're happy to have you here, and we welcome you to our community today. And we look forward to your inspiring words. And before we get started, or before Jan gets started on her talk today, we are going to watch a short 5 minute and 27-second video, and it's titled Think of Yourself.
Think of yourself as a thought of the Infinite One, made flesh by your sheer desire to see and be seen. Think of yourself as nature, looking upon nature, in awe at its grandeur, in tears for its wounds, nature loving itself, healing itself, speaking out for itself. Think of yourself as a vessel of stardust and clay, a child of the cosmos, transforming energy into matter, wave into particle, mortal into immortal. Think of yourself as a soul who took on a body to be of use, to radiate love and receive it in return. Think of yourself as necessary, purposeful. Remember that you came here to light the world. Think of yourself as a shaman whose hands heal whatever they touch, as a storyteller whose words fall like rain on a drought-stricken land, whose stories are medicine, miracles that heal the sick and raise the dead. Think of yourself as a circle, holding yin and yang, as unity, cradling the dualities in your arms. Think of yourself as a thought leaning toward radiance, an early dawn rising into daylight. Deep inside you, the fire of creation burns day and night. Atoms forged from the Big Bang spin and swirl in your blood and bones, your lungs and your legs. Like salt in the tear, joy in the laughter, the Holy One is in you, being scattered like seeds across the land as you speak and write and reach out to touch. You are the hands and feet, the eyes and ears of the great beloved. You are the one we are waiting for. Your stories are the ones we are waiting to hear. It is time now for each of us to speak, to say what happened and what we learned. To reveal ourselves is to heal ourselves, and to heal ourselves is to heal each other and the world entire. From our revelations of intimacy and truthfulness, vulnerability and generosity, the future takes shape and enters into us. Our words made flesh, our thoughts made real. Yes, think of yourself as a creator, the peace you desire, the justice you cry out for. These will come as we speak them into being. As the cosmos is being created by the mind of the Infinite One, this world is being created by the minds of the finite ones, by us. Let us be mindful and full of care for the words we speak, the thoughts we think, the stories we tell, for these are the tools with which we build tomorrow.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is a great circle to be part of. I always love being part of new thought circles. The talk is called Stop Learning, Start Knowing, because that's a line from Rumi. And people think of the mystics, the Sufi mystics, the Catholic mystics, the great Christian mystics. That when people talk about mystics, you always hear about like the Middle Ages, right? You talk about prophets and you think of Isaiah, Jeremiah, right? It's very hard. I don't know why. I think it's part of the nature of the church, how it's really kept us from our fullness, that doesn't acknowledge in this world today are the living mystics and the living prophets. And I think of us as the new thought community, as the prophetic community in the desert now, that our job, because we have, many of us released ourselves from other religions and institutions that have held us back. I was raised Catholic, cellular Catholic, they install that religion like software with music and sensuality and candles and frankincense and the whole regalia, all men, of course. But because I was born gay, around puberty, I got really sad and suicidal because I realized, I'm homosexual. But everything Catholic said to me, bad, sinner, pervert, terrible, God hates you. And so I was all ready to kill myself when my 6th grade nun saved my life. She started a positive reinforcement campaign on me and kept me alive. And that was the whole reason I decided to go into the convent, which seems now a ridiculous decision to make for somebody like me. But I go in at age 18, which couldn't have lasted long because I was still queer. And that does not work in an institution like a convent. So those 2 years they let me stay there, 2 important things happened. One was I was introduced to the mystics that were more contemporary. Teilhard de Chardin, the paleontologist, scientist, Thomas Merton, the mystic who was bringing the East and the West together, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran theologian who fought against Hitler and was killed as a result of that. While I'm reading the lives of these mystics and trying to understand what they're saying about mysticism, because what we know about mysticism is that it's an unmediated path, that none of us need a priest, a minister, a rabbi, anybody to help us get there. It's like religion is the stepladder, and then you get to the top step, and there you go, merge with oneness. That's the mystical experience. So choosing New Thought community over wherever you came from, Baptist, Catholic, Temple, Hindu, any one of those things, means that you have done what Walt Whitman said in his preface to Leaves of Grass: re-examine everything you've been told by any person or in any sacred book or by any teacher, and dismiss what insults your soul. And so I trust that we are a spiritual community who have dismissed the untruths that accompanied the religions that tried to claim us as their own. You know, Catholicism is still very old-fashioned and very mean and has terrible opinions about the LGBTQ community. And plus, they've excommunicated me years ago. I won't have anything to do with them, but I cannot not be Catholic. How we're formed and how we're shaped always has some kind of influence on us. That's why I think Meister Eckhart, who's a German, yes, from the Middle Ages, a German mystic, who said the process of finding God is a process of subtraction, not addition. We have to let go of, dismiss those things that insult our souls. And part of my encouraging other people to step into their prophetic role is to imagine that next week you are going to be the one in this box called the speaker. And you are going to be given 15 or 20 minutes. That's how much time you get for a TED Talk. And you better be darn sure of what you're saying. You know, when you do a TED Talk, they make you go the week before and rehearse it all and film it all and be sure you're clear enough, because many of us are muddled speakers. And I had the experience once. I was doing a workshop in, was going to be in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I'm driving there with two friends in the car. It was based on my book, Divining the Body. And before we got out of San Diego County, one of the women, Jane, says to me, "Oh, I'm an atheist, by the way." And I say, "Atheist? What in the heck are you doing coming to a Divining the Body workshop? People are going to be talking about God all over the place." And she says, "People always talk about God all over the place." And I said, "Well, what do you do as an atheist? How does it feel? How do you defend yourself? What happens to your mind when that happens?" She goes, "Oh, it just goes right through." But for me, as the facilitator of the event, knowing that I had an atheist in the room, it's like knowing you have a person who can't hear in the room, or a person who can't see well. You always make accommodations to the one who needs the most help, right? You always change up everything for anybody's disadvantage so that you equalize the playing field. So now I have like 8 hours of driving time to try to figure out, what am I going to do? How am I going to facilitate this in a way that makes the whole weekend, Thursday through Sunday, be as great for an atheist as for everyone who was there? And we were in an RV, and we had to stop in Albuquerque and pick up 3 women coming in from Ohio. And we were making them sandwiches at the table. And here's what their language is like. "Well, we were on our way to the airport, and it was raining so hard. There was thunder and lightning, but God stopped it just in time for us to..." And now I'm hearing the word God differently, right? Then another one starts to talk about how God gave her daughter a child with Down syndrome in order for her daughter to learn patience. And I'm going, oh my God, God gave somebody a child. This is awful, because now every time I hear the word God, I'm thinking of Jane and how she's hearing it. And God, I married an alcoholic because God knew I needed this or that. And I'm just horrified by this. So when it's the first night to do our introductions around, we sit down in the circle and I say, okay, the only rule for the weekend is you say everything you want to say, but you can't use the word God. And people are like, what? How am I going to talk if I can't say God? I said, you're going to figure out what you really mean and say that thing that you really mean. It's like the difference between a Hallmark card and a Mary Oliver poem. The Hallmark card will say God, and a Mary Oliver poem will say the wind against the fawn in the forest, right? So they had to become more concrete, and they couldn't abstract and use that concept, because I don't know about the rest of you, but when I hear people talk, it runs like a movie in my mind. And if people don't tell me stories that have pictures, I have to stop them and ask for those details. So anyway, we got through that weekend. And by the last day, there was a major change, a transformation that had occurred in those women, because suddenly their language was, they were speaking like co-creators. It wasn't just that they weren't using the word God. Something had happened with how they were communicating, and they were acting with greater agency and speaking with greater authority. So I made a decision from then on. I was going to always facilitate events where I was going to encourage people not to use the word God. So a few years ago, I'm invited up to Nova Scotia and going to lead a 5-day retreat with Michael Morwood, who's an Australian priest who got, what do you call it, silenced by the Catholic Church for being too radical, for localizing God instead of keeping God up there in the heavens. So he stopped being a priest, he got married, he's writing more books, and he and I were co-facilitating this week up in Nova Scotia. So the day we were going to do our first teaching together, we sit down for coffee at the bed and breakfast. And I thought I better tell him that I don't, about my feelings about using the word God. So I go, Michael, I hope it's okay for you, but as a co-facilitator, I'm confessing to you that I discourage people from using the word God. And he just started laughing. He says, oh, thank goodness. He goes, I hope I have something to confess to. I hope it's okay with you, but I discourage people from using the word Christ. And then we just kind of knew that we were going to be great colleagues for the whole deal. And I got to understand him and his whole relationship about the Christ word. I know it's in your mission statement, but the deal is this. All those conceptions, Christ was never Christ until St. Paul comes along, like 30 years after Jesus had died. Paul never met Jesus. He makes up this whole story, calls him Christ, because Paul's Greek, and the word for the anointed one is Christos. So all of a sudden, Jesus gets this second name, Christos. because Paul and Mark wrote the first, books in the New Testament. And now everyone talks about Christ, but nobody knows what that means. It's like I bet a lot of you would have a hard time explaining to your neighbor the meaning of Christ consciousness in a really friendly, user-friendly, like as if you're talking to a 12-year-old way, 12-year-old kid. How would you describe Christ consciousness? And so Michael Morwood's whole shtick was, let's just focus on Jesus. Let's just say he's our teacher. And what do we know about Jesus? That he was for the poor, that he spoke up against marginalization. He told those parables like the Good Samaritan. He reverenced justice. He was always a stand for justice. And he said, I and the Father are one. Right? That's patriarchal language. In Aramaic, I bet it didn't sound like that. In fact, there's Aramaic translators who said the Our Father should really start with, or could really start like this: O cosmic being, creation unfolding. Right? Instead of Our Father who art in heaven. But that's a semantic language issue. But the point is this: we, as the New Thought community, want to be prophetic in a way that we could deliver the goods to 12-year-old people and have them understand what's up. Because what's up? People come up to me all the time and say, I'm a spiritual seeker. And I'm like, oh God, that's too bad. I was a spiritual seeker once, but I'm a spiritual finder now, because you don't play hide and seek the same game for 50 years. You find that person that's hiding under the couch, right? You deliberately go after what you're after and figure out how to find it. So I would ask, what are we seeking? What are you seeking? Because it's all accessible. The only thing we don't get to do is see the great beloved. But in my opinion, as I've subtracted Catholic teachings, and I have prayers for an hour today before I join with you. And in my prayers, it's always the same. I light my candles and I imagine I'm in communion with creation unfolding, which is the verb. It's the verb aspect of me, creation unfolding. I'm the noun aspect of that force. I'm the visible part. It's like I'm the yang of the yin divinity. And so I think of it, the Father as fire and air, and the Mother as earth and water. So all the elements, but we're earthlings, and the Father and I are one. And if you trust, nobody knows, because there were no stenographers at any of Jesus's events. But if you go with the thing that he might have said, anything that you've seen me do, you can do and more. It would be true for us that we are one with the Father, that we are one with creation, right? So you think of God as the great wilding, and we think of ourselves as the wilderness, right? Two aspects of one thing. So when Rumi said, stop learning, start knowing, I think what he meant is stop seeking, start finding. Don't read any more books. We're old enough to be creating our legacy now, right? You're old enough to figure out how to package what's happened to you, because it's happened for you, as well as to you, as well as through you. I co-created that. I got kicked out of that convent. It didn't just happen because I was a great novice. I contributed to that fateful night when they sent me home. So yes, it happened to me. I was kicked out of the convent. Yes, it happened through me. And yes, it happened for me because I was an eagle in a canary cage. But I needed those 2 years in order to get myself steeped in an understanding of mysticism, because churches want you in the pews. They want you to think you need a priest and that you need to contribute so much money and that you should have so many children to keep this Catholic Church going. It just goes on like that. So part of the New Thought community is to understand we come together to support each other's mystical and prophetic journey in a celebratory way. And the ones who take turns to do the talks could be any one of us. It could be Douglas next week, Ruth Ann the next week, Kim the next week, Sherry the next week. And we just go like that because by now, from the looks of us, we're all at least over 40. And a lot of things have happened to us. So we have to face it. Since George Floyd, nothing remains the same. Since COVID, nothing remains the same. So our country is in the midst of a renaissance of thinking. We're in the middle of a new racial reckoning where we as white folks, for the first time in our lives, are learning stuff we never knew about how we are, how our thoughts have been conditioned, and how we have not seen our own privilege. And that's all part of our prophetic work, right? Each of you, my guess is, have 4 or 5 books on your bedstand that have to do with race right now, because we're having to educate ourselves in this regard. And so when you think of what are you seeking, if you still think of yourself as a seeker, what is it you seek? A joyful life? In whose hands is that? Nobody's going to come and give you a winning lottery ticket in order for you to have a joyful life. So you create the circumstances you want to be part of. Those people here who are in Montana or wherever you are, you created that. You love that big skyland and you make it a point to get there. And every one of us has created that we're living in the place we're living because we're on purpose about it. I have a pool right out there, right? I'm in sunny San Diego. I'm very happy, right? I created this. So that we have a blissful life is in our hands. Everything is. I started boycotting the song, He's Got the Whole World in His Hands, a few years ago, because that's not true. There's no he up there who's got the world in his hands. We have this earth in our hands, right? That is part of our holy work. So I think of it as blasphemous to go around speaking about a God who has agency over our lives. And that's what makes us as a New Thought community prophetic. And the requirement is a mystical approach to our own lives such that we are true and dedicated to a spiritual practice. That it's not just Sunday where we come together in order to have a holy moment with each other. We have holy moments with the great beloved every day in our own private sacred ways. You all should have an altar in your house someplace already. You probably all do. I mean, I know who I'm speaking to here. And whatever it looks like, it looks like that. That's your altar. And some of you will say, well, my altar is the forest that I go to. My altar is the river where I sit by the creek or whatever. We all are responsible for identifying the place where we are in the most reverent communion with the invisible creation that's unfolding. So to me, it's not a difficult thing. It takes your spiritual practice. It takes knowing, being able to say, what are your spiritual commitments based on who is your spiritual teacher? And even though, I made a peace pilgrimage around the world in the 80s. So then I get introduced to Buddha and Hinduism and Sri Aurobindo. And so I have many layers of sacred teachers. But if one only has Jesus, or if one only goes to Mary Magdalene, whoever you have as your teachers, that's your business and nobody else's. But that we're able to say, I create my life based on these commitments. These are my ultimate concerns: to be a stand for justice, to care for the poor, to raise the holy consciousness of the community I live in. That means that you're living a life that's true to your faith. That is a blissful life. That's the formula for bliss. That, religion is something that we inherit. It gets handed down to us. It comes to us from outside. But faith is something that we create based on what we say as adults we're committed to. And the living out of those commitments is actually our spirituality in running shoes. So I'm going to end this talk with a poem from my book called There Are Burning Bushes Everywhere. And the poem is called, What Does It Matter? This is an example of what this little book looks like, because you all will be so inspired by today. You're going to decide to make your own book on blurb for your children or your grandchildren or your next door neighbor. What does it matter? What does it matter, the myths of old, if they don't feed the soul and fire us up when we take them in? What does it matter if God exists, or Jesus rose, or Eve ate an apple, if in our time we allow hungry children, human trafficking, the shunning of gays by the people of God? What do I care about church or religion when they don't lead to justice or mercy or truth? I am here to live out the meaning of God, not to argue about what God means. Don't make me laugh with that pompous talk about true religion. Get up on your feet and do something. Show me what it looks like to be a believer. So I hope whenever you hear the words stop learning, start knowing, or my version of it, stop seeking, start finding, which is my next book that I'm working on. I hope that you recall how much of this is in your hands, and that very God that you speak of or think of is right here in this space and right here in the air in your lungs. It's unavoidable. And it's your co-creative dance partner, right? But you're the lead here. So just remember this: the process of enlightenment is a process of subtraction, not addition. You don't need any more books, but you probably will want to buy my new book that's coming out in October. And you probably do want to sign up for my newsletter on my website, because you will be in a great sacred loop. just as you are in this community here. It never hurts. I'm in so many sacred circles all over the place because it just keeps fueling us. So stay connected, stay true to your spiritual practice, and never forget that what you're seeking already exists deep in every one of your cells. So that's all I have to say. And thanks for this opportunity. I'm going to